There is a silent art that every human being senses intuitively, but very few consciously master. An art that does not consist of stage tricks or supernatural powers, but of decoding the subtle signals of the psyche, reading the traces of the inner world in gestures, in language, and even in silence. It feels almost magical, yet it is deeply human, the art of reading minds. And the philosopher who can hand us the deepest tools for this is Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche never claimed to be a mind reader, yet anyone who reads his writings with open eyes discovers a radical ability. He could see behind facades. He could pierce through the masks that people, often without knowing it, wear. For him, every word, every act, every moral statement was only the tip of an iceberg. Beneath it, hidden in shadow, lay the real forces, drives, fears, desires. Nietzsche understood something essential. Human beings rarely say directly what they think, but they always reveal themselves. And this is where our journey begins. If you learn to apply Nietzsche's methods to your own life, you will begin to notice the hidden patterns that people unconsciously expose. You will realize that mind reading is not magic at all, but a precise art of perception, a fusion of psychology, philosophy, and ruthless honesty. But before we look at the techniques themselves, we need to build a foundation. What does it really mean to read a thought? A thought is not just a sentence in the head, it is a trace. It arises from moods, from body posture, from old experiences and suppressed desires. Nietzsche saw every thought as a symptom, as the surface expression of deeper forces. When someone speaks of morality, for example, they are not only showing their values, but also their fear of chaos or their longing for control. Thoughts, in Nietzsche's words, are masks of instinct. Whoever grasps this truth can begin to look behind the mask. The first tool is radical attentiveness. Nietzsche once said, in essence, there are no facts, only interpretations. What does that mean? It means that everything we encounter, the words of a friend, the tone of a colleague, even a passing glance in a cafe, has already been shaped by layers of interpretation. If you want to read thoughts, you must learn to penetrate these layers. What matters is not the obvious, but what pulses in between the lines. Imagine someone saying, "I'm fine." Most people accept that at face value. Nietzsche would ask, why emphasize it right now? Is there a tremor in the voice? Do they avoid eye contact? Do they laugh too loudly as if trying to drown out their own words? Here, in the contradictions, the unspoken truth begins to show. That is the first lesson. Words are disguises, and the body betrays what words try to conceal. But caution is needed. Nietzsche warned against moralistic self-deception. Reading thoughts is not about judging too quickly. The art lies in recognizing patterns without immediately forcing them into categories of true or false. We must learn to observe like scientists, not condemn like judges. Only then do the deeper layers open themselves. And it is here that the explosive power of this practice reveals itself. For once you begin to see the hidden dynamics, you recognize that almost every human being lives behind a facade, sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of adaptation, sometimes simply to be loved. What you call mind reading is, in truth, the decoding of this facade. And Nietzsche gives us the language, the images, the psychological sharpness to do exactly that. When we speak of thoughts, we often imagine they come purely from within us. We like to believe we are the sovereign rulers of our minds, the inventors of our ideas. But Nietzsche shatters this illusion. He shows us that much of what we think does not arise from ourselves at all, but has been planted from the outside, through childhood, society, and morality. In truth, we are often nothing more than the spokespersons for foreign voices we have long mistaken as our own. This process begins early in life. A child is, at first, a bundle of curiosity, will, and unfiltered spontaneity. It asks, it laughs, it cries, it experiments. But very soon, these raw impulses collide with boundaries. The raised eyebrow of a parent, the scolding tone of a teacher, the mocking laughter of other children. Each of these moments leaves a mark. The child's free "I want" turns into a cautious "may I?" and eventually into a silent "I'd better not." Nietzsche did not see this as neutral education, but as a subtle form of domestication. Human beings are tamed like animals on a leash. What appears to be learning is, in truth, the slow internalization of foreign voices. A child's thoughts stop being the pure expression of its being and become echoes of the expectations of others. Listen closely, Nietzsche would say, and you'll notice, the silence inside us is not empty, but crowded with commands from the outside. Here, morality enters the stage. For Nietzsche, morality was not just a code of conduct, but a powerful instrument of shaping human beings. It tells us what is good and what is evil, but behind those labels lie social interests. Morality is the invisible scriptwriter of our thoughts. When someone thinks, "I can't do this, it would be wrong," it is often not their authentic conviction speaking, but the voice of a tradition, a church, or a culture that has embedded itself in their consciousness. The danger lies in this. Most people don't even realize they are speaking with a borrowed tongue. They believe their inner judge is their true self. But Nietzsche unmasks this illusion. What we call conscience is, in many cases, nothing but the internalized police of society. The thoughts we believe are ours are often the very chains that bind us. If you want to read minds, you must understand this mechanism. People reveal themselves not only in what they say, but also in what they leave unsaid, and in the reasons why they leave it unsaid. Take, for example, a friend who constantly emphasizes the importance of being strong, of never showing weakness. Beneath this obsession lies almost always an old internalized judgment from childhood. Perhaps he was taught that crying was shameful, or that vulnerability was unmanly. What he now defends as his own conviction is, in truth, an old scar disguised as thought. For Nietzsche, mind reading meant precisely this: exposing the invisible authors. Recognizing that behind every statement stands not only an individual, but also their childhood, their society, their moral conditioning. Every thought bears a signature, and those who are attentive can decipher it. Consider another example. Someone insists that fairness is everything. Noble words, admirable in tone. But Nietzsche would dig deeper. Is this really an original conviction, or the residue of a culture that clothes weakness in the language of fairness to restrain the strong? Behind every moral statement lies a struggle for power, and that struggle writes our thoughts. This leads to the second great lesson. Thoughts are rarely original. They are intersections of influences, voices, and values. Whoever sees this does not just read thoughts, but also their sources. In every conversation, you hear not only the person in front of you, but also their parents, their childhood, their teachers, their traditions. And this shift is liberating, because it shows us we don't have to remain trapped at the surface. If you learn to expose the origin of a thought, you will understand not just what someone thinks, but why they think it. And that is where the true power of mind reading lies. It's not about predicting words, it's about decoding the hidden logic that generates them. When we carry the voices of childhood and society within us, something strange happens. We begin to control ourselves before anyone else can. Nietzsche exposed this process with brutal clarity. He called it the bad conscience, a state in which a person no longer lives their instincts freely but turns them inward. The energy that once flowed outward is redirected into self-criticism, guilt, and constant surveillance of the self. This is where the inner monitoring system emerges. It is like an invisible judge, always present in our heads, day and night. It comments on every impulse, every thought, every gesture. It whispers, "Don't say that, you'll make a fool of yourself." Or, "Don't show weakness, no one will respect you." This whisper is not harmless. It is a relentless force that narrows life. Nietzsche revealed that this mechanism is one of the most effective forms of power, because society no longer has to punish us if we punish ourselves. It no longer has to control us if we have already learned to control ourselves. We carry the chains willingly, believing them to be our own thoughts. But if we look closely, we discover this inner voice is not our true self. It is an echo of old looks, old threats, old comparisons. It disguises itself as reason, as conscience. But in reality, it is fear wearing the mask of wisdom. The fascinating and at the same time disturbing thing is that you can sense this inner censorship in other people the moment you become attentive. It appears in small gestures, an abrupt silence in the middle of a sentence, a sudden glance to the side, a smile pasted on too quickly. Each of these moments reveals that the inner tribunal has stepped in. The person wanted to reveal something, a thought, a feeling, a truth, but the inner judge cut in instantly. No, that is forbidden. For Nietzsche, this was no side issue. Here lies the source of human suffering. It is not the outer rules that break us, but the rules we have swallowed and turned against ourselves. To read thoughts means noticing these hidden battles, not only what someone says, but also what they cannot bring themselves to say. Take an example. Someone dominates a conversation, appearing confident, even aggressive. But if you watch closely, you see tiny hesitations before each statement, a microsecond of pause. This hesitation is revealing. It shows that every word is being screened by the inner judge before it passes into the world. Behind the facade of confidence, a silent battle with self-censorship is raging. Nietzsche also pointed out something paradoxical. This inner censorship doesn't just weaken us, it can also generate creativity. The energy that is pushed inward often seeks another outlet. Art, philosophy, poetry, all of these are born because people are forced to transform their instincts. The artist paints because he cannot fight. The poet writes because he cannot scream. To read thoughts, you must recognize this paradox. Behind repression often lies a hidden explosion of creation. Here emerges the third great lesson. Thoughts are not simply expressions. They are the results of an inner courtroom. What you hear from someone is the end product of a silent negotiation in their head, between impulse and censorship, between desire and fear. And this is the art. When you see this pattern, you understand not only what someone thinks, but also what they suppress. You read not only the spoken, but also the swallowed, not only the words, but the pauses between them. Nietzsche urged us to look precisely here, at the places where people forbid themselves to be themselves. Because once you understand this, you are not just reading thoughts, you are reading the very struggle of human existence, the eternal war between instinct and control. Human beings are masters of disguise. Nietzsche knew this better than anyone. He once wrote, "Everything deep loves a mask." By this he did not only mean conscious deception, but also the unconscious need to protect oneself. Because to reveal oneself fully, to show every impulse openly, is to become vulnerable. And so we build masks. Some are delicate, others crude, but all serve the same purpose, to control how others see us. These masks are not simply lies, they are survival strategies. We wear a smile when we feel empty inside. We project strength when we are afraid. We act calm while rage burns within us. Everyone knows these roles, at work, in family, even in friendships. Nietzsche saw through this theater. For him, masks were not incidental. They were the key to understanding human psychology. If you want to read minds, you must learn to see masks, and above all, their cracks. Because wherever a mask breaks, the true face appears. How do you recognize these cracks? By spotting inconsistencies. A person claims to be happy, yet their voice trembles. Another talks about strength, but their shoulders slump in exhaustion. Someone preaches morality, but their eyes dart away when pressed for details. Each contradiction is like a fissure in the mask. To a trained observer, these leaks speak louder than the words themselves. Nietzsche would say, the truth of a person is not in what they consciously declare, but in what they unconsciously betray. And betrayal happens constantly, in pauses, in nervous twitches, in laughter that doesn't fit the moment. Learn to read these signs, and you enter the hidden realm behind the facade. But there is a deeper layer. Some masks are worn so long, so tightly, that even the wearer believes they are real. A person can spend years playing the role of the successful one, the strong one, the morally pure one, until they themselves are convinced. This is the most dangerous mask, the one that fuses with the skin. Nietzsche called this form of self-deception the greatest weakness of all. For once you mistake your mask for yourself, you are completely estranged from who you are. For the mind reader, this means one thing: never be blinded by another's conviction. Just because someone believes in their role with full passion does not make it real. Pay attention to what remains when no one is watching. Pay attention to how people act when there is no applause. That is where their true thoughts emerge. Take an example. The colleague who constantly boasts about how honest he is. Perhaps he emphasizes honesty because he secretly fears being exposed as dishonest. Or the friend who endlessly projects strength. She may be hiding a deep fragility she dares not admit. These are not rare cases, they are patterns. And once you recognize them, you will see them everywhere. Nietzsche did not only view masks as deception, but also as art. The human being creates roles as an actor creates characters. In this sense, mind reading is like directing a play. You watch the performance, you notice the breaks in character, and you identify what the script has left out. But here lies a danger. Those who see too many masks can become cynical. They see only lies and lose faith in authenticity. Nietzsche warned against this, because masks also have a purpose. They protect, they enable social life, they create spaces in which people can function. To read minds is not to rip masks away violently, it is to understand why they are there. And that changes everything. For once, you can see through masks, you don't just become sharper in dealing with people, you also become more compassionate. Because you realize that behind every role, whether it appears strong, cold, or arrogant, lies a vulnerable core. Mind reading, in Nietzsche's sense, is not only a technique but an attitude, the willingness to perceive what is unspoken without condemning it immediately. This is the fourth great lesson. Masks are not obstacles, they are clues. They reveal more than they conceal. Whoever learns to read their cracks understands the human being, not just the performance, but the longing behind it. We have seen how Nietzsche pierced through the facades people build, how he exposed the voices of society that live inside us, and how he revealed the masks and the silent inner tribunal that governs our lives. But in the end, it all leads to one uncomfortable truth. If you truly want to learn how to read minds, you must first learn how to read your own. That may sound obvious, but it is the greatest challenge of all. Because while we can often spot contradictions in others, we are blind to ourselves. We believe our thoughts are free, but in reality, our minds are full of old programs, foreign voices, and masks we have worn for so long that we mistake them for our very skin. Nietzsche urged us to begin here, not by changing the world first, but by ruthlessly examining the architecture of our own inner life. How do you read your own thoughts? By refusing to accept them at face value. A thought like, "I must not do this." Where does it come from? Is it truly your conviction or the echo of a parent's warning? A thought like, "I am not good enough." Whose voice are you actually hearing? Nietzsche would say, every thought is a suspect, and we are obliged to investigate it. This is not an intellectual exercise alone. It requires courage. Because when you read your own thoughts honestly, you will inevitably encounter pain. Old wounds, repressed desires, the realization that for years you may have deceived yourself. But this confrontation is the gateway to freedom. Only when you see how much of your thinking is borrowed can you begin to strip it away. Here Nietzsche's most misunderstood idea becomes vital, the will to power. Often mistaken as a desire to dominate others, it is in truth the power to shape yourself. Reading your thoughts is not a passive act. It is the first step in recognizing your chains, and then seizing the strength to break them. This also means cultivating compassion for yourself, not in the weak sense of self-pity, but in the strong sense of self-respect. When you realize that many of your harshest inner voices are not your own, you can begin to stop obeying them. Freedom doesn't arrive overnight, but you begin to walk its path. And here, something surprising happens. The more clearly you learn to read yourself, the more clearly you can read others. Why? Because you know the mechanisms. You recognize the taste of an inauthentic thought because you've seen it in yourself. You notice self-censorship because you've caught yourself doing it. You spot the mask because you know how heavy it feels to wear your own. True mind reading begins the moment you can decipher your own illusions. Nietzsche called this process self-overcoming. He did not mean hating or destroying yourself, but constantly growing beyond your own deceptions. Humanity, he said, is a rope stretched between the animal and the overman, swaying above an abyss. To read minds is to walk this rope. Every step means leaving behind another illusion. And this is perhaps Nietzsche's most radical message. Mind reading is not a trick that gives you power over others. It is a practice that gives you power over yourself. Because once you can see through yourself, you no longer fear the truth, and therefore you no longer fear the thoughts of others. Imagine what this means. You sit in a conversation and you don't just hear words. You perceive the forces behind them. You sense the mask someone wears without condemning them for it. You recognize that silence speaks as loudly as speech, and at the same time, you allow your own masks to fall. This is not a circus act. This is freedom. So our journey ends here, but in truth, it only begins. Nietzsche gave us no final recipes. He gave us tools, mirrors, provocations. What you do with them is your choice. Will you use them to manipulate? You will lose yourself. Will you use them to understand more deeply, to live more honestly, to speak more bravely? Then you will not only read minds, you will rewrite your life. In the end, the choice is yours. Will you continue to sit in the theater of masks, or will you tear down the curtain and face yourself with clear eyes? Nietzsche would say, Become who you are. And perhaps that is the highest form of mind reading, not to see through others, but to finally see yourself. If this journey with Nietzsche spoke to you, I'd be grateful if you support the channel. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes, give the video a like if it inspired you, and share in the comments what you personally take from it. Your words matter, and they might help someone else on their own path.